Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks for joining us on a somewhat snowy afternoon. I'm pleased to see a good turnout. This morning I wasn't quite sure that this many people were going to make it, so it's very gratifying to see you. I'm Bob Hathaway. I run the Asia program here, and it's a source of particular pleasure to me to be hosting this event today, in as much as Bill Milam is not only a valued member of the Wilson Center community, but also someone who in recent years has become someone I consider a good friend. So much that he even allowed me to travel with him to Pakistan a couple of years ago. He hadn't invited me to go back with him.
You were my bodyguard.
But I hope that an invitation of that sort will be forthcoming in due course. We're here today to talk about Bill's new book. We're also here today, frankly, to celebrate the publication of this new book. I've read it. It's a terrific read. I recommend it to all of you. As you probably noted, there are copies immediately outside this door for sale. We also, when we adjourn here in a bit over an hour, will offer you a little bit of food and drink in the hopes that the good fellowship may induce you to buy a second or an even third copy. They make excellent gifts for, I guess it's St. Patrick's Day, which is coming up next. And a book on Pakistan and Bangladesh is particularly appropriate as a St. Patrick's Day gift, so I recommend it to you.
Well, it's green, so...
That's right. Exactly. I expect because you're here, you already know Bill. I'm not going to give you a long introduction. I will note that for the last half dozen or so years, he's been a senior scholar here at the Wilson Center. He had a long and distinguished career as an American diplomat, serving as, among other places, the American ambassador in both Dhaka and Islamabad. To the best of my knowledge, he's the only American diplomat who has served in both those posts, and one would think that gives him a special vantage point in writing a book comparing these two countries. But beyond those two postings, he had other senior and important postings. He was the U.S. Chief of Mission in Liberia. He retired some years ago, but since then has been called into duty not once but twice. The first time in the weeks immediately after 9/11, and then more recently he was asked to come back and to reopen our mission in Libya. Bill doesn't get the easy assignments, as you can tell. In addition to working on this book and otherwise contributing to life here at the Wilson Center, he also writes a regular column for the Daily Times. Bill, we are delighted to have you here. We're delighted to celebrate the publication of this book, and I turn things over to you.
Well, thank you, Bob. That was a very kind biography. Thank you. And I want to say thank you, all of you, for coming on during this bad weather, and I'm very pleased, and I hope you didn't get your feet wet along the way. Let me start by telling you that this book took a long time to come out for several reasons. There were some technical glitches that were, probably my fault as much as anybody's. But there were also problems with keeping it up to date. And I'm not an academic, so I couldn't really come to a conclusion as to when to cut it off. And I actually delivered it to the publisher once at the end of 2006. And in it were, sort of my final comments that the Bangladeshi army would never take over the state again, and that Musharraf would stay in power for a long time in Pakistan. Well, 3 weeks later, the Bangladeshi army took over the state, and 3 months later, Musharraf started screwing around with the Chief Justice, and the first thing you know, the judiciary was in revolt and the lawyers were in revolt, and Musharraf was on the slippery slide downhill. So I pulled the thing back and updated it. That was partially when I was in Libya, and when I came back from Libya, I delivered it again to the publisher. That was the beginning of 2008. And then the technical problems took over for a while, but we finally got it out. And I must say, it feels like that 600-pound elephant is finally off my back. I'm going to start another book one of these days. I have to say that there are so many people that helped me with it that the list, if I were to read it and say thank you to everybody, would take up most of our time. So I'll try to be a little bit brief. I'd hope I don't leave anybody out. But I want to say, first of all, that I owe a great deal of thanks to the Woodrow Wilson Center, to Lee Hamilton, who has provided an enormous support and interest in my work, to Bob, who has been an amazingly good friend and an amazingly good reader of the book. He gave me early comments, which really helped a lot. And to my friend Dennis Cooks, whom I know is here somewhere, who also looked at the text early on and was very helpful. I want to thank the Association for Diplomatic Studies and Training, which has been a supporter and a sponsor of the book, and Marjorie Thompson, who is the publishing director thereof and also who has acted as an agent for me, and given my naivete, I needed one. There were a number of reviewers who were very helpful about the book and very helpful in guiding me in directions that I had not taken to begin with. The first one I want to mention is, I'm sorry to say no longer with us, Craig Baxter, who was very helpful with early drafts of the book, passed away about a year ago. And I wish he hadn't, because I would have liked him to have seen the final version. He himself is a writer on South Asia, both on Pakistan and Bangladesh. Matthew Nelson, who is at the School of Oriental and Asian Studies in London, and I haven't met him yet, provided written comments through the British publisher Hearst that were extremely helpful. And he, I think, actually gave me the focus that I needed to put into the book. And Tezzy and Howie Schaefer have looked at it and were also very nice in their comments and very helpful in their comments. Now, I want to mention some friends who are around, and particularly our series of Pakistani scholars who have been here over the years and who have helped also. Riaz Mohammed Khan, who should be here today, Samia Altaf, who is here today, Mushtaq Khan, who was here a couple of years ago, and Khalid Ahmed, also here a year or so ago, were very, very helpful. And I need to say that I have at least two former research assistants here who did really wonderful work, Sam France and Samir Mansour, both of whom deserve a great deal of credit for some of the fact-checking and some of the data that is in the book. Finally, well, not quite finally, but I want to thank my friend Sidney Weintraub, who has been my model and mentor for almost 40 years and who was, encouraged me to get to do this project. And I will say thank you to him because it has been a very worthwhile project. And finally, I have some of my family over to the right, and the benefit they have is that they were very patient while I went through all of these periods of depression. So thank you to them. Now, You know, the book is subtitled Flirting with Failure in South Asia. I think, having looked recently at J.K. Rowling's Harvard commencement address, we could have called it Fear of Failure in South Asia, because I think perhaps it's fear of failure in these two countries, and in particular in Pakistan, that is part of the motivational force for all of the Western concern about what's going on there. These two countries, particularly Pakistan, are on some sort of a downward trend. What do I mean by failure? I certainly don't mean the kind of failure that I saw in Liberia. I don't mean the kind of failure where the state is non-existent, that warlords are everywhere and run their own territory, and that there is no even semblance of law and order. That is not what's going to happen in either of these countries. I don't know, I can't quite describe what failure would be there, but I think, first of all, we're going to know it when we see it. It's going to be something short of Liberia, but it will be something that will be a dysfunctional behavior and action in one or both of the states. Dysfunctional action and behavior that becomes a threat, a regional threat and an international threat to the security of the region or the international community. But they're going to be different in Pakistan and Bangladesh, this level of failure. In Pakistan, I think probably failure will entail some part, if not all of the country, falling under some sort of a control of extremist forces. And this will pose dangers that you can imagine, including the fact that that part of the country will be a haven for international jihadist extremists that will pose a danger to not only the United States but all of the Western countries. Now, I think probably that the danger applies mainly to the area of Pakistan west of the Indus, where the jihadists are already in serious control of much of the territory. And then there's always the nuclear issue. Since Pakistan is a nuclear nation, there is a question about how would the West and the United States respond if the state is endangered, either by a very serious control of the western part of the country or very serious inroads into the whole country, in terms of the command and control of this nuclear arsenal they have. In Bangladesh, failure is something different, I think, and probably less likely. It would entail some sort of a return to dysfunctional governance, which really obtained between 2001 and 2006, and which lasts long enough for forces that are deleterious to the security of the region and perhaps the international community to build up significantly. That's probably a longer time. It didn't happen in those 5 years, although it started. Now, but one worries about the most recent news from Dhaka, which is a mutiny, a serious mutiny of an armed force, a paramilitary force as it is, but still an armed mutiny. And one harkens back to the 1970s when mutinies in the armed forces were sort of an everyday occurrence. I think Zia Rahman, the military and civilian leader of Bangladesh from 1975 to 1981, when he was assassinated, put down something like 22 or 23 mutinies in the armed forces, and he put them down with great ruthlessness. And we'll have to, I don't know how the present government is going to deal with this mutiny, but it is a worrying sign that perhaps social harmony and social conditions are deteriorating more than we had thought. We shall have to wait and see. It's too recent. in any of these kinds of failures, one of the other certain symptoms will be that the people of the country, or of one or both countries, will be much worse off than they were before. So anyway, now I'm not going to tell you, what's specifically in the book. That's, of course, to whet your appetite. But what I am going to talk about for the rest of my time up here is the themes that I think spring from the book, which lead us to worry about failure in both countries. These themes are really, I've divided them into three very general categories: religion, in its various aspects and how it has affected the political development of each country, culture and its interaction with religion and with politics, and the third one, which is perhaps the most important in the ever-present difficulties of residing on the same subcontinent as India, somewhat like being a Canadian and trying to reside on the North American continent. Anyway, let's start with religion. I've got this divided into several kinds of subcategories. I think the first one, which involves religion, and particularly involves it in Pakistan, is the failure of each country to find a national identity. They are still looking, and that's part of the problem in each country. The Pakistani national identity problem is specifically religious. Is it a Muslim homeland for South Asia, or is it an Islamic state? Or is it, to put it in other terms, is it Jinnah's vision or the vision of the Islamists? Jinnah was the creator of Pakistan, I think you know. The Bangladeshi problem is only indirectly religious. It involves a difference between those who were always thought of the Bangladeshi identity as a pan-Bengali identity, in other words, including Bengalis who are not Bangladeshis because of their culture, their language, and the other ethnic elements that make up a wider Bengali culture. Or is it a Bangladeshi identity, Bangladeshi nationalist identity, which is confined to the territory of what was East Bengal, East Pakistan, and is now Bangladesh, therefore an Islamic identity, since most of the people in it are Islamic, are Muslims. And this has been also a division in political division, which has kept the two major parties in Bangladesh from ever really finding a way to get along with each other, and that's part of the problem in that country. The second sub-theme that that comes out of the book is the phenomenal growth, particularly in Pakistan, but also in Bangladesh, of Islamist forces and Islamism, particularly in Pakistan, a radical Islamism which we could call jihadism. This is a phenomenon. The growth of Islamism is a phenomenon throughout the Muslim world. It's not limited to these two countries or to South Asia. And it's not only a phenomenon in other Muslim countries, but it's a phenomenon in parts of Europe and even, I suppose, a few parts of the United States where there are Muslim populations. But while sometimes these small populations elsewhere threaten to violence, they are not so numerous, and they do not threaten a state per se as do the jihadists in Pakistan. Bangladesh, they do not threaten the state yet, and although they were growing the last 2 years where Bangladesh had a military government, that army coup that I mentioned earlier, actually I think jihadism was reduced significantly. Let's hope it stays that way. In Pakistan, the Pakistan Islamists have had a singular vision of an Islamic state since 1940. And they have used what I would call Leninist strategy and tactics constantly to achieve their goal. Now, why do I say go back as far as 1940? Because the history of the Pakistan movement, even before Pakistan achieved separation from India and independence in the so-called partition of 1947, very bloody if you recall. But going back even to 1940, there was a ambiguity about what Pakistan was going to be, an ambiguity which actually was fostered by the leaders of the Pakistan movement, including Jinnah, in order to keep all Muslims sort of in the same fold. And towards the end, the end of World War II, when there was an election and the Muslim League was desperate to win, they even began to use what I call the sectarian card, Islam in danger from Hinduism and so forth. So the beginning of Pakistan, there was a growing force of Islamists who had their own vision of the state. That the competing vision was, of course, one that Muhammad Ali Jinnah had, and who knows what would have happened had he lived for a number more years, and because he was quite forceful in his governance. But he died within a year of the creation of Pakistan, and ever since then, there's been a slow recession of the Jinnah's sort of vision, which was a secular, almost non-denominational vision, towards a more Islamic state. This leads me to my next topic, which is the long history of what I call Faustian bargains between Pakistani politicians and the Islamists and or the Islamic religious parties. And these Faustian bargains were, in fact, kind of trading away parts of Jinnah's vision for more immediate political goals. This began in 1949, 2 years after independence, when there was a sort of a stalemate over the drafting of a constitution. And Jinnah's political heir, Liaquat Ali Khan, actually drew up something called the Objectives Resolution, which put Islamism as a preface into the Constitution. And it has been, ever since, as I said, a kind of habit of Pakistani politicians to make these Faustian bargains when they needed Islamist support for some more immediate goal. For example, Zulfikar Ali Bhutto, who was the leader right after 1971. He traded away all kinds of things to get his own constitution, including the provision that the Islamists were insisting on, that the president and vice president must be a Muslim. This is, by the way, one of the criterions of an Islamic state, is that you have to have a Muslim chief of state. Bhutto gave away that in order to get their support for certain parts of the Constitution. Bhutto then later on traded away for other political reasons the apostatization, if I can say that, of a sect called the Ahmadiyas, who do not accept Muhammad as the last prophet, but who had thought of themselves and are thought of generally as Muslim. These trades go on and on and on. There were also both Ayub Khan, who was the first military dictator, and Bhutto, Zulfikar Ali Bhutto, sought to use religion to bolster their own political power. And basically this was by finding ways to use the Sufi peers. These are Sufi sort of priests, if you will, who are in many Muslim societies and religious societies a kind of intermediary between God and the public, sought to use them for their own purposes. To advance right on to the present, this peace deal that is so controversial in SWAT is basically an extension of these Faustian bargains. It's a continuation right up to the present and probably into the future of this practice of sort of trading away things to the Islamists. These bargains raise the question of whether the Pakistani political class has the common will to resist the existentialist extremist threat to the state, or whether over time, probably a long time, it will slowly bargain away Pakistan's considerable leverage against the Islamic jihadists. Leverage, I say, because jihadists are not that big in number and not that powerful militarily. They're well armed, but not vis-a-vis a military as powerful as that of Pakistan. Let me move on to my cultural points. First of all, both countries have poisonous political cultures, and this comes out in the book quite clearly. In Bangladesh, it's more simply a kind of a cutthroat, no rules, no holds barred political culture in which winning is everything, and a total disbelief in parliamentary government, even though they are a parliamentary government. Pakistan, they have the same sort of culture, but this is tied to something more toxic in a sense. It is the growth of the Praetorian state. The growth of the Praetorian state means that the army has over time developed such deeply vested interests in governance and in the society that it is really the dominant part of the political structure. It always struck me that in Pakistan, during the periods when there are civilian rule, it was kind of like the play Waiting for Godot, because everybody talked about when is the army coming back, and certainly this is still the Godot that is hanging over the present political system, which is run by civilians right now. You had a hybrid political military/civilian government under Zia-ul Haq for 11 years. Actually, it was he ruled for 11 years. The hybrid government in structure was only in the last 3. He began the process, which has been followed with great enthusiasm by General Musharraf, of filling civilian jobs in the government and in parastatals with retired military officers, to the point where even the civilian interludes, given the inability or unwillingness of the army to give up total control, even the civilian governments really resemble these military civilian hybrid governments. And whether the army, the present situation is one where the army says it's out of politics and will stay out of politics, and one is not able to gainsay that, but one wonders what will happen when the crunch really comes. Here's another thing that comes from, sort of springs up out of all this analysis that you'll find in the book, and that is the low regard of the Pakistani establishment for public education. Why? I've never been quite sure. Perhaps because the feudals saw no need for educating their whatever you call a feudal serf, or perhaps lots of other reasons. But of course, we all know the problems that this has called in terms of a collapsing public educational system. The only alternative being religious schools called madrasas, which has and led basically to an illiterate majority. Only about half the Pakistani population can read and write, which looks to the mullahs, who are not all that literate themselves, for guidance. And this is one of the reasons why there was always a public pushback to efforts to modernize the society and to reform the social structure of the society. Look at, for example, women's development and women's education. So this has always been a serious lack, I think, in Pakistan. The last category that springs out, this last theme, is India. And India is really central to it all. India is, particularly in Pakistan, a kind of a toxic centricity. Now, I want to point out that I'm not saying that India is the villain here. India is a very large country and has generally acted in its own interests, or what it perceived of its own interests, even though from afar one would think once in a while that India hadn't always acted with the maturity that we would like to see in a regional superpower. But really, it's the countries who are pushing the India problem to the point of toxicity that probably are the problem. In Bangladesh, the relations with India are a partisan issue, and this is the major problem. The Indians helped Bangladesh become independent. They helped Bangladesh separate from the rest of Pakistan. The Awami League, which came to power, was thus pro-Indian, and therefore the Awami League's opposition became nationalist and anti-Indian. And this has continued through the 38 years since then. But generally, in Bangladesh, a party assumes office with its ingrained attitude towards India, but soon realizes that it has to deal with India on the basis of its own interests and work with the Indians, who are, after all, I hope nobody takes offense at this, the 600-pound gorilla next door. So Bangladesh usually comes to a point after a few months of governance by either the Awami League or the BNP of dealing with India on the basis of defending and preserving its basic vital interests. The Pakistan problem with India is more acute. I call it India-centricity, which has fostered, among other things, the growth of this Praetorian state. The belief by the army and by much of the public is that India is the existential threat. And right now that's a problem because the actual existential threat comes from the other direction. But this explains the army mindset and the public mindset, which is that the army has always been the guarantor of national security and the guarantor of security against India. This is why the Army has always remained sort of foremost in the political spectrum. This is the reason why Pakistan plays double games, why it uses proxy jihadi forces against India, why it's not quite sure and hasn't worked completely coherently with us or cooperatively with the United States and the West in Afghanistan. I think it's quite clear that India is the central problem, and until the West and until the United States figures out how to make this India centricity, if it doesn't go away, at least become less important, there will always be a problem with Pakistan in terms of its ability or its willingness to cooperate with us. Every foreign policy issue and national security issue in Pakistan is, I believe, seen through an India-centric prism. Now, I don't know, I've taken probably a little longer than I should have, but these are the themes that I think jump out of this book. You will have to read the whole book to find them. Some of them are fairly explicit and some of them aren't, but they're all in there. But it seems they explain, at least in my view, why we still worry about failure in these two countries. Thank you.
Thank you, Bill. I want to turn it open to the crowd, but I'm going to go ahead and ask the first question. I want to take you back to the cultural issues you raised, but I want to raise a slightly different cultural issue. One of these states is dominated by Punjabis. The other state even more so by Bengalis. Has this difference between the two has it made any difference in how these two states have developed?
Absolutely. Punjabis are only one of the ethnic strains of Pakistan. In fact, I say somewhere in the book that Pakistan is a hodgepodge of ethnicities, Punjabis being the majority, and Punjabis being the dominant ethnicity, but not the only one. There are significant ethnicities in Sindh, in the northwest frontier, particularly the Pashtuns, the ones, some of whom are, as we know, being very good Taliban right now, and in Baluchistan, where there's been a sort of counterinsurgency against the state for 35 or 40 years. So there is a problem in the sense that Punjabis are thought of by the other ethnicities as overbearing and dominating, and and willing to use a kind of majoritarianism in Parliament, for example, to get their way. Bengalis are, the whole Bangladeshi nation is Bengali. They all speak, and by the way, let me go back and say, that means, of course, in Pakistan that all these people have a different native language. They all speak, most of them now speak Urdu, although my understanding is that when the state began in 1947, Urdu was the native language of only 7% of the Pakistani population. It now is at least a second language for everybody, I think, but they all still have their own native languages and their own ethnic cultures, which are different in some ways. In Bangladesh, it's a very different thing. It's a homogeneous country. All Bengalis speak Bengali. All Bangladeshis speak Bengali, I should say. And the culture is more homogeneous throughout the country. So there aren't the kind of regional differences that you find in Pakistan. And I think this has made a difference in their political development, and particularly in the sense that you haven't seen as in Pakistan, where the army is predominantly Punjabi with some Pashtuns, you haven't seen the army being so dominant in the last few years, despite what happened in early 2007. The army has been basically apolitical, and I think is trying to be that way again.
In Bangladesh.
In Bangladesh, sorry, yes, yeah.
Okay, David. David, hold on just a minute. We're webcasting this so that people in Bangladesh and Pakistan can hear you. If you'll wait until Michael gets the microphone to you, introduce yourself, and then have at it.
Thank you. I'm David Birnbaum here at the Wilson Center. Bill, I'm intrigued by the difference you elaborate on as between the Islamic movement and its success, relative success, in Pakistan as compared with Bangladesh. What accounts for that?
David, I think it's the Pakistani polity has been more fragmented, and there has been how shall I say, and Islamism became a sort of objective of the state I should say an Islamic state became the objective of the Islamists from the very beginning, from before the inception of the state, actually. And I think that is the Islamists in Bangladesh are a much smaller group, a much smaller minority, and the extremists basically are Johnny-come-latelys. They've only recently come to the scene. So I think that it's just a much different kind of history of Islamism in the two countries. Now, by the way, let me ask, I'm sorry, there is one other thing I should add. The main Islamist party in Bangladesh was against the separation of Bangladesh from Pakistan. And actually, there are rumors, I don't know how much evidence there is of this, but most people believe that some of the Islamists there, this is the Jamaat-e-Islami, aided the Pakistani army as it performed a lot of atrocities against the Bengali people. So when the country became independent, the Islamists, particularly the Jamaat-e-Islami, was cast into the political outer darkness. They were somehow brought back by the military when the military took over and framed a more nationalist philosophy, which gets to the two competing national visions, because the military had the national vision. The military governments and many conservatives were more conservative and had the vision of a Bangladeshi national identity, an Islamic identity, and also the military government in particular needed legitimacy, so it reached out to some of these Islamists who were out there in the outer darkness, and slowly they came back into the political system, but they were never very strong and have always had to ally with particularly the major conservative party, the BNP, in order to pick up any kind of parliamentary seating at all.
Okay. Yes, we're gonna take questions from this side and then go this side, simply so Michael doesn't have to run back and forth.
My name is Rana Fawad. I'm a freelance journalist from Pakistan. Mr. Milam, first question is about how do you define Pakistan's Islamist parties, because after the recent elections, there are hardly 4 or 5 seats in the parliament they could win. Second, Pakistanis think when we talk about extremist Islam, especially in FATA, tribal areas, they blame that when General Zia embraced the anti-communism policy, that's when extremism was injected into that area, and jihad and Islam was used to counter Afghanistan. So do you agree with that it contributed to the culture of militancy we have now in that area that introduced Kalashnikov culture also Pakistan? Thanks.
What was your first question again? I'm sorry.
You say Islam is the dominant theme in Pakistan's politics, but the recent elections and so many other elections except the one 2002, which were engineered by the ISI, Islamic Party has never won in Pakistan.
I remember now.
Right? Okay,
yeah.
Thanks.
Well, the answer to your first question is that there are Islamists and there are Islamic religious parties, and I didn't mean to conflate the two. I hope you didn't. I hope you're not in your own mind. I'm sure you're not. The Islamists are, in a sense, a broader group, particularly because they include people who are not really running for political office, but in fact conducting jihad, either in Pakistan or over its borders in either Kashmir or Afghanistan. And I think that the Islamic religious parties did get, this goes into your second question, a much larger vote than they would have in 2002 because of government ISI interference. The rejection they suffered in the February 18th, 2008 election probably reflects their popular support. I never said, and I never intended to say, that Pakistan itself is an Islamist country or an immoderate country or a radical country. I think most Pakistanis are quite moderate in their views, quite benign in their religious views, and very Sufistic in some ways. So but there is an extreme Islamist element that is certainly got targeted the state of Pakistan, and that's what I was talking about, and that's what I think that's clearer in the book, actually.
And the second question
well, I thought I answered that.
General Zia's policy.
Oh, General Zia's. Well, of course. I mean, everybody. I think that goes without saying that the policy that of equipping, radicalizing the Mujahideen, starting in 1979 with the invasion of the Soviets, and we contributed to that more than I like to think, certainly had a great deal to do with radicalizing the tribal areas and the whole area up in the Northwest. Yes, there's no doubt about that. But let me just add, the practice of the Pakistani government of using jihadists first in Afghanistan and then in Kashmir certainly also contributed because it kept the jihadi culture alive.
Other questions on this side? Okay, over here then. Wait for Michael to bring.
My name is Ali Imran. I'm correspondent for Associated Press of Pakistan. My question is to Ambassador Milam. You have just mentioned Kashmir, and you have observed that in order to get Pakistan's full cooperation in the fight against terrorism on Afghan border, it is necessary that the United States in some way deals with the India problem. Now that the Obama administration is in the process of reviewing its policy to find out a way forward in Afghanistan and Pakistan border regions, what would you advise them? And they have appointed a special representative for Afghanistan and Pakistan, but they have somehow not included India. Doesn't it look kind of unrealistic that we can solve the problems with these two countries and not in a real regional sense?
Well, it's unrealistic that we can solve the problems without Pakistan and India also working to solve the problem. I think what we have to do is find ways to get the two countries working together to solve the problem. You know, there's a recent article by Steve Call in the New Yorker. I haven't read it, but I understand that among other things in it, he says that in 2007, then President Musharraf came within a whisker of getting a deal on Kashmir, which would have, I think, as I understand it, made Kashmir given it some sort of autonomy with open borders, and which might have been acceptable to the Indians. They were working to get there. And you would have had a solution to if that had happened, you might have had a solution to the Kashmir problem. It's going to take a Pakistani government with the kind of interest that President Musharraf had in solving this issue, and the kind of political support he thought he had to solve it, which I don't think the present Pakistani government feels that. It's also going to take an Indian government that gets over the latest atrocity in Mumbai and gets back to, probably after the election in May, gets back to a more normal discourse. And what I would advise the United States to do is to stay in the background, under deep cover if possible, and try to urge both sides to move back towards the agreement that they seem to have come very close to working out a couple of years ago. He has a second part of the question.
Yeah, Ali, wait till we get a microphone to you so it can be heard.
Microphone's right there.
No, it's not related to this. You have been ambassador to Pakistan and Bangladesh, and I'm sure you would have recently traveled to Pakistan. Since 9/11, U.S. and Pakistan have been cooperating closely. Would you like to enlighten us what kind of benefits has Pakistan had from this alliance? And secondly, do you see the positives in Pakistani cultural life, especially the explosion of media, and how is it contributing to creating awareness about democracy and human rights?
Well, that's particularly the second part's a two-edged question, double-edged question. I'm forgetting the first part. What was the first part?
Reward or benefits to Pakistan.
Oh, yeah. Sorry. I think the relationship since 9/11 has been a rewarding one for both sides, although I must say that there's been frustration on both sides, too. By the way, I haven't been in Pakistan in over a year, so I'm speaking more from my reading of Pakistani newspapers than I am from an immediate knowledge of what's going on there now. But, of course, one of the things that Pakistan has received is a good deal more money than was available to it from the United States before 9/11. Whether that money was always well used, and particularly whether it went to the right areas, is another question. I would have thought that they needed less military assistance and more economic assistance, but I wasn't running the United States government, and still am not. And Pakistan, although up until a couple of years ago probably didn't need this money for its balance of payments problems, it has in the last year or so needed a serious injection of funds, part of which it got recently from the IMF, but our assistance both on the military and the economic side, I think, were useful and helpful in that respect. So Pakistan has gotten that kind of benefit, has also gotten the benefit of some military training, and particularly in counterinsurgency. It needs more, but the Pakistan Army admits that it is short on knowledge and short on training on how to fight against insurgencies. So I think those are the benefits that have accrued to the Pakistan side. To our side, we, of course, have also gotten benefits from Pakistan's ability to find a lot of very senior al-Qaeda people and hand them over, and also to help us on some of the other anti-terrorist projects that we have, and they have too, because these are in both our interests. Now remind me of the second part of your question. Oh, the media is a real double-edged sword, and I hesitate to say that to a media person like yourself. But, you know, if you watch Pakistani television, and particularly, my understanding is if you watch the Urdu, but the popular channels in Urdu, an awful lot of what I would call media stars are not really impressed that this extremist threat, existential threat from extremists to the Pakistani state is real. That it is not all something that is being, that the war on terror is not something that is being done for the Americans and actually is an American war that Pakistan has no part of. That seems to me to be a very short-sighted view, but it seems to be the dominant theme, particularly in these new on these new television channels that have expanded in Pakistan over the last 4 or 5 years. So this is what I hear. I am not an expert on Pakistani television, and I don't speak Urdu, so I can't always, watch and figure out what's going on. So anyway, that's my answer.
Ray.
Poor guy.
Bill, at the start, you outlined what you thought of as failure, both for Pakistan and for Bangladesh, and you said, we'll know it when we see it. And I'm wondering if you meant by that it was virtually a foregone conclusion that we would see the kinds of failure that you that you outlined at first, and if not, what do you see? What would success look like for Pakistan and Bangladesh? And if you see there is some possibility for success, what are the probabilities between failure and success for the two?
Well, darn it, Ray, you talk about putting me on the spot. First of all, it's not inevitable. Failure in both countries is not inevitable. It's more likely in Pakistan because we've seen how much the extremists have already encroached upon the writ of the government in the areas west of the Indus. And I defined, insurgent control of most of the West, most of the territory west of the Indus as one possible and probably the most likely kind of failure that we would see. But I don't think it's inevitable, and just as I was sitting down to write my newspaper article, my biweekly newspaper article that Bob so kindly mentioned at the beginning last night, I opened up, actually yesterday, I opened up the Sunday papers and find headlines that say, Pakistan Army claims total victory in Bajur and in Malakand. I think it was Malakand. So my article actually started out with the line, will the real Pakistan please stand up? Because is this a country of Faustian deals, or is it a country which is going to hit back militarily? We can't tell yet. We just don't know. But if the government is able to convince itself as much and the military is able to convince itself that this is a real existential threat that's coming from the West, and if they want to, particularly if the Army wants to turn around or turn some of itself around and move to fight the guys in the West, then I will say that we're on the road to stopping the slide into failure. And I think there's some signs that may happen. Bangladesh is a different story. Bangladesh failure is first of all a lot less likely, the kind of failure that I mentioned, but also it's also a different kind of failure. It will be a failure, and this I feel bad about Bangladesh for, because it's the kind of failure that we won't notice. Probably we haven't noticed much about Bangladesh so far. That it will be just a slide back to the bad old days of between 2001 and 2006, when governance was totally dysfunctional, And the people, the Bangladeshi people, just suffered enormously as a result. And over time, Ray, if that were to continue for a very long period of time, you would see a growth of extremists in Bangladesh. They had them in 2004, I think, or 5, when this group called the JMB set off 200 simultaneous bombs and killed a few people, basically to try to announce that they were there. But they've already been dealt with, so that there is a possibility of a resurgence of extremism in Bangladesh, but it's a lot further away.
And the probabilities?
You don't really want me to give you probabilities, do you? I would say, I don't know. I'm not going to. I don't really want to give you probabilities.
Bill, let me ask you about a possibility of a different type of failure for Bangladesh. When the experts talk about countries who might be affected by global warming, Bangladesh is always listed as one of those most vulnerable. Do you see, and I'm not now talking about the current government, which has just been in office for a couple months, but over the last 3 to 5 years, do you see anybody seriously grappling with the dangers posed by climate change, the dangers to Bangladesh, and do you have any considerable confidence that Bangladesh will be able to respond to these potential dangers before it's too late?
Well, first of all, there are some Bangladeshis writing about the dangers of climate change and of, global warming. Secondly, Bangladesh, as you well know, is a very poor country. So I haven't seen any evidence, and I haven't been there in a while either. I haven't seen any evidence that the interim government of the past 2 years, or the present one, has yet been able to address, even think about that question. So the answer is, if this comes real fast, Bangladesh is going to be in serious trouble, and so is India, because Bangladeshis are quite mobile and they'll all end up in India. But if the West were to start thinking about how we could help Bangladesh get ready for it, I think that you would have a willing partner.
Okay. Stephen, and then Dave.
My name is Stephen Shore. My question is, you mentioned that Pakistan should recognize an existential threat to the West. But the record of any nation in dealing with more than one existential threat at one time is not very good. So wouldn't a solution with India, especially, which essentially means a solution of Kashmir, be essential if the Pakistanis are going to move another number 2 existential threat to the front burner?
Well, I'm not sure that people cannot understand that, first of all, the Indian existential threat is no longer as existential as it used to be. Probably the Indians didn't, for example, although there was a lot of fire and brimstone in the Indian press about the Mumbai thing, rightly so, and a lot of recommendations that that India mobilize, get ready, take punitive action against the jihadist camps and so forth. The Indian government so far has been relatively, how shall I say it, relatively sane about its actions and its behavior, although its rhetoric has been intense. I don't expect that we're going to solve the Kashmir problem, even if both sides were to all of a sudden have a change of mind. It would not be solved overnight. What I'm thinking is that just the beginning of a process is going to reduce the perception of existential threat from the east and allow the army to turn itself or part of itself around. But you know, at some point, even if that doesn't happen, and the army, there's no reason why the army can't recognize that the Indians are not the main threat right now, and move part of itself back to the west. In fact, part of the army has moved west. Did move west. There were something like 6 divisions in the tribal areas that moved over there in the last couple of years, and then Mumbai, and then several of them moved back towards the east because this the whole India thing got very, very roiled up. But you may be right, and if we, that might be one criterion that we will look at to see how, you know, whether we're heading towards real failure. Because if the army cannot adjust itself to the fact that the threat comes from where actually behind it now, and if the government cannot adjust itself to start working on a Kashmir solution at the same time, we're in trouble. They're in trouble.
Dave Ottaway?
Dave Ottaway. I'm a senior scholar here. My question, kind of a follow-up on what you're just discussing, which is the relationship between the Islamists and the military in Pakistan. And Mumbai brought this up again. Seems to be this internal issue of trying to figure out whether the ISI is supporting these groups, still very much involved in a lot of the jihadist activity, and to what extent it's the driver of Pakistani military policy. Because here you have the army going in trying to secure these areas, and the ISI who's supporting the groups that caused the trouble in the first place. So it's very confusing, to me anyway, to what extent the military is part of the problem, in the sense that they've allowed the ISI to become the driver of the policy and to form these alliances with the Islamists for the purpose of better control of Afghanistan in the long run, I gather. But what is your assessment of who's making military policy in Pakistan? Is it the ISI driving it, or is there the army, the military itself, that's fighting its own ISI and trying to impose a different policy?
That's a very long question, and I'll try to give it a relatively short answer. But let me start by saying that I read just a couple of days ago somewhere, I can't remember where, talking about Pakistans and Pakistanis, that Pakistanis have a high degree of ability to cope with ambiguity, and that's the reason you're confused. That's the main reason. First of all, I want to say that I have never believed, and this when I was in Pakistan and since then, that the ISI is a rogue organization. The ISI is staffed by army officers who rotate in and out, whose careers are dependent on what the regular army and the regular officer corps at the senior levels thinks of them. So I don't consider that what the ISI does is somehow a rogue policy that they're undertaking on their own and thumbing their nose at the army and at whatever civilian political presence there is. I think that I will grant you that there are some rogue officers. We've had a few in our own CIA, by the way, and that there are retired ISI people who probably are no longer under anybody's control, who probably carry out, shall we say, who behave and carry out actions that are not what the Army and the ISI want. So what you've got, David, is a situation in which the Army is working with both hands. It's a two-handed policy. On the one hand, they're doing what they can to beat the Pakistani Taliban. Let me go back and say there is also an element of ambiguity here, because there are several kinds of Taliban, and they are very good at separating them out. So there's the Pakistani Taliban, particularly in the tribal areas, that the army that is basically directing its efforts against the Pakistani state, the ones who assassinated Benazir Bhutto and so forth. And the army's been taking them on. It hasn't won too often, but it's been taking them on. But then there's the Afghan Taliban, who the army may perceive, probably does perceive, is still doing things that are in Pakistan's interests. So you help one set of Taliban and you fight the other set. And that's the ambiguity that they have no trouble living with.
Well, it may be less ambiguous to them than it is to outsiders such as ourselves.
Well, that's exactly right, yes.
I'd like to give the last question, though I would also encourage him to make comments, if he wishes, to Riaz Khan. For those who have not met Riaz, he is our new Pakistan scholar. He was, until last year, Foreign Secretary of Pakistan, having served in a succession of very senior positions in the foreign service of Pakistan. Riaz, the microphone is yours. Actually, Riaz, one other thing before you do. Also want to acknowledge that we've been joined by Lee Hamilton, the president and director of the center. Lee, Bill acknowledged your terrific support for the book before you came in. We're delighted to have you.
Can I say something about Riaz? Riaz is one of my oldest, not in terms of age, but just in terms of time, Pakistani friends. And I've known him for at least 10, 12 years now, and I'm really fond of him. But that may change depending on what he says.
No, Bill, you should not have any fears. First of all, I should congratulate you for finishing this project, the book. I know it's always a very tedious undertaking, and congratulations that you have been able to put it together and it has seen the light of day. I'm sure that a better discussion can only follow once one has gone through the book and seen all the various aspects that you have brought out. But let me say a couple of things. One is about Pakistan. Pakistan is a very large and complex country, as you have lived and you know. 170 million people with all kinds of problems, and I do not want to underestimate the problems and challenges that we face today. But Pakistan has sometimes been viewed outside, and this is at least the impression that we get in Pakistan, from narrow perspectives. Like, for example, in the decade of the 80s, it was the Afghan issue, and much of the outside world, especially in the West, United States, they looked at us from the perspective, narrow perspective of Afghanistan. And today, it is seen from this narrow perspective of what is happening in FATA. FATA, or the federally administered tribal areas, this is 3% of Pakistan's population, and where there is problem, North Waziristan, South Waziristan, if you take that population, it is less than 1%, it would be 0.7 or 0.6% of Pakistani population. And the whole problems, they are concentrated in North and South Waziristan. Now you have added to that Bajaur and Swat. Swat again is a complex issue. I don't want to get into that. Whether this is a Faustian deal or this is something that should have been done much earlier, or the agreements which were there with the Swatis, it was a princely state and it was taken over in 1967. So whether the kind of systems they had, that they should have been continued, that's again a very separate question. But in FATA, while we have more than 100,000, more than 6 divisions, as you have mentioned, we have been very clear right from the beginning that it is not going to be just military action and military effort alone which will pacify this very difficult situation. A difficult situation which has a history, because FATA had been the staging ground for the jihad in Afghanistan for more than 10 years. And then it got roiled up with the internecine strife, which lasted for almost another 1 decade prior to 9/11. So the whole traditional systems of governance and traditional system of administration, that has been completely disrupted in that because of the Afghan jihad. And much of the rise of militant religious leaders that we have seen, it owes to that background. But it will be a difficult endeavor for us. As I was mentioning to you earlier on this today, that for our army to really have a very strong action against these people who look like us, and in a sense they are our people, is always going to be a very difficult task. It is one thing sometimes, they pound with guns and there is a reaction. You have mentioned about media and how these anchormen, others, etc., they basically attack and target the government for these actions. There are almost 50 channels, Urdu channels, which are today operative, and it creates a lot of problem for the government. And it's not only in Pakistan. You look, for example, Mr. Karzai. He has also been protesting the action which has been taken by NATO forces, because his own, or whatever is the Afghan army, they are not very effective. Here, of course, it's only the Pakistani army that has to take action, so we have to be very careful. And we have to have other approaches, supplementary approaches, political, economic, etc. So this is one thing. FATA, Pakistan, seen from the prism of FATA, Pakistan is much larger. So this is one comment that I wanted to make. You had said that much of the territory west of Indus is now under the control of these extremists or Islamists. I would say that if you take much of the territory of Balochistan, the problem in Balochistan are not Islamists. Problem in Balochistan is an insurgency which again is about 30, 40 years old, and that is basically a nationalist movement. It was, it used to have some leftist leaning, but of course that is no longer the case, but they are more like a nationalist movement rather than an Islamist movement. And Balochistan is a very large territory west of Indus. And when you take NWFP, again, as one of the speakers earlier had said, that when the elections were held, it was the ANP, again a secular party, a professedly secular party which has won in NWFP rather than the Islamists. Of course, NWFP is the province which has FATA, which has Swat, which has also Malakand. Bajor is, of course, one of the tribal agencies. So what I would say is that while the Islamist activity is very worrisome for Pakistanis all over, I would not say that much of the territory west of Indus is controlled by the Islamists. There has been mention of the U.S. assistance also and how it has been spent. I would like to say that U.S. assistance since 2001 has been in the range of $10 to $11 billion. But I would not call half of it assistance. Half of it is reimbursement for the services which have been extended to United States. For example, the use of our bases, logistics. That is reimbursement, and it goes for basically to our budget, and mostly it serves balance of payment. But I would not say that this 5 billion plus is assistance. This is something that basically you owe to us because of the facilities which have been extended. In 2001, of course, United States has the choice. It could go to Central Asia, it could go to any other country, but I think Pakistan was a logical choice. And these are reimbursements. But most of the time it is being mentioned that this is assistance that was given to Pakistan for doing some job. Now, the rest of the 5 billion assistance, which is half economic and half military, we are grateful for that. It's a help, and we appreciate. But naturally, we also have convergence of interests. That is why this assistance. Otherwise, there have been periods in Pakistani-U.S. relationship when we were under very, very stringent sanctions. Kashmir, India-centric policy. We have tried to move away from India-centric policy in the last, say, 4 years or so. And it happened under a person who was a military person, basically, but Pakistan is not, it's familiar with military periods of rule and also democratic periods of rule. And there are certain advantages when we have these military rules, that is in the sense that it provides stability for economic growth, one, I can say that. Secondly, sometimes there have been focused foreign policy efforts for resolving things. Indus Water Treaty was, it materialized under Ayub Khan. He was a military man. He was able to take decisions. And this initiative for discussing a settlement of Kashmir, this initiative was a Pakistani initiative. This I can say with all authority. It didn't come from India. It was Musharraf, and of course there were a lot of discussions on this. Yes, we did come very close to putting together a framework. It was almost ready. There were certain political steps which were needed, but there were unfortunate developments in Pakistan. One thing that I would say also that both of us, Pakistan and India in particular, lost a lot of time in trying to develop this framework. I wish it were developed early in 2006 rather than in 2007, when in Pakistan the internal politics started unraveling. You are very right that there is absolutely no other way than for the two countries to again refocus their efforts, pick up the threads where they have been left, and focus on this problem. We have been telling the Indians that the best confidence building is to be able to demonstrate the ability to solve problems. We have not been able to do that. There are other problems also which are quite solvable. For example, Sir Creek, we have been able to have for the first time a survey, and a beginning can be made. But if the Indians, they take these incidents like the Mumbai incident, earlier also there were incidents in Mumbai in 2006, which we were able to overcome and restart negotiations. So I hope we will be able to do to again pick up the threads and have these negotiations. We also know very well that outside countries, they do not have a great leverage with India to influence their attitude on negotiations with Pakistan. But again, it is in the interest of both the countries that they must refocus their efforts on solving issues. So these were some of the comments. There were comments about, I think, Pakistani capability, the Pakistani army's capability. Yes, we needed a lot of things in FATA area, helicopters, night goggles, many other things, which came very late. I remember that helicopters, for example, were provided, some of them, in 2007. So there is a great deal of coordination that United States and Pakistan can still have if we have to succeed in this. You can call it war on terror, or you can describe it by some other means. But there is a need for a lot of coordination, and I hope that the discussions that General Kiani had recently in Washington, they would clarify the way forward for both the countries in terms of cooperation. ISI, you have already commented on that. They are professional. General Kiani, who is now the Army Chief, used to be the ISI Chief. So it is not the Army fighting the ISI. That one can be quite sure of at present. Thank you.
Thank you, Riaz. Bill, I don't know whether you want to make any last comments or not. You may, if you so desire.
No, I don't have any comments to make, except that I'm, again, happy that everybody came, and I hope they will join us outside while we lift a glass.
Well, there's a special rule here. If you buy more than one copy of the book, you can have more than one glass of wine.
There you go.
But do stay, buy a book so Bill can sign it, join us in conversation and sustenance. Thank you for coming. We are adjourned.